What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected icons steps onto a daytime talk show expecting warmth, only to walk headfirst into a storm? You're about to relive one of the most uncomfortable, explosive, and emotionally charged moments in daytime television history. A moment so raw, so unscripted, it turned a simple interview into an unforgettable showdown. It began like any other press morning. The studio buzzed with artificial energy, coffee cups clinked backstage, and the producers of The View were finalizing camera cues. Harrison Ford, yes? The Harrison Ford was scheduled to appear for a promotional chat about his upcoming film. Ford had done this routine 1,000 times before. Walk in, smile, nod politely, answer a few recycled questions, toss in a charming anecdote, and call it a day. That morning, he walked into the ABC studio in Manhattan wearing the casual confidence of a man who's weathered decades in the spotlight. A dark blazer over a charcoal shirt. A seasoned face etched with lines not just of age but of legacy. But as he stepped onto that shiny, polished set, Ford had no idea what was about to unfold. The lights dimmed, the audience clapped, and the theme song faded out as the hosts of The View smiled their practiced smiles. They'd been briefed by Ford's publicist to keep things light. The memo was clear. No political landmines, no jabs about the past, just movie talk. What they got instead was Joy Behar. The moment Ford sat down in the guest chair, he offered a polite smile and a nod to each host. Joy returned it with a smirk-a-loaded one. "Well, well, well," she said, leaning forward like a lion sizing up its prey. "Look who we have here, Harrison Ford, the man who made a career out of playing the same character over and over again." It wasn't a question. It wasn't banter. It was a shot fired. The other hosts shifted in their seats. The audience chuckled awkwardly, unsure if it was a joke or something more sinister. Ford, unfazed on the surface, offered a measured reply. "I'm sorry, Joy, but I think you might be confusing me with someone else. I've played quite a range of characters throughout my career." Joy leaned in again, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Really? Let's see. You've got the grumpy pilot in Star Wars, the grumpy archaeologist in Indiana Jones, and the grumpy detective in Blade Runner. Seems like a pattern to me." The room cooled. This wasn't lighthearted teasing. It was antagonism. Ford's publicist, standing just off camera, felt her stomach twist. She had specifically warned them not to go there. Ford's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Joy, I came here to talk about my new film. Maybe we could focus on that instead of whatever agenda you've brought to the table today." The word "gender" sent a tremor through the air. Joy straightened up, her smirk hardening. "Agenda? I don't have an agenda, Harrison. I'm just calling it like I see it. You've been coasting on the same handful of roles for decades. When was the last time you actually challenged yourself as an actor? Silence. The kind of silence that suffocates a room." Ford had dealt with tough interviewers before. He had sat across from critics who dissected his work with surgical precision. But this didn't feel like critique. This felt personal. This felt like a trap, and he wasn't going to take it. "You know what, Joy?" Ford said, his calm starting. "To give way to something raw. I've been acting for over 50 years. I've worked with some of the greatest directors in cinema history. I've played everything from carpenters to presidents, and not once have I felt the need to justify my career to someone who makes a living gossiping on daytime television." "A gasp fluttered through the audience. Joy's face flushed red. But she wasn't done. "Gossiping? Is that what you think this is? I'm asking real questions. Questions your fans deserve answers to. Or are you too much of a prima donna to handle?" A little honest criticism. Ford stood slowly. His chair scraped against the floor like a warning bell. "Honest criticism? This isn't criticism. This is an ambush, lady. I've faced tougher critics than you. At least they knew what they were talking about. You're not even in the same league," Joy snapped back. "Sit down, Harrison. You don't get to intimidate me just because you're some big-shot movie star. This is my show, and I'll ask whatever I damn well please." Ford leaned forward, his voice low, almost a growl. "Your show is a joke. You spend your days tearing down people who actually create things. While you contribute nothing but noise, at least when I play a grumpy character, I'm getting paid to pretend. The other hosts were frozen, wide-eyed, silent, helpless. "You think you're better than everyone else, don't you?" Joy fired back. "You think being in a few hit movies gives you the right to look down on the rest of us?" Ford's hands clenched, and for a heartbeat, he looked like he might snap. Then came the line that dropped the room into stillness. "Your best days are behind you," Joy said, "and everyone knows it." Gasps. A few audience members audibly whispered, "Oh, my God." Ford's face went pale. His breath caught for a split second. That hit a nerve. Not because it was true, but because it was meant to hurt. He turned to Joy, eyes narrowing. "My best days are behind me," he repeated, voice a whisper soaked in steel. "Let's talk about your best days, Joy. When exactly were those?" Joy blinked. The tide had turned. "And don't say it was during your stand-up years." No one laughed then, and no one's laughing now. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Asterisk. The audience held its collective breath. What had started as an uncomfortable exchange had now crossed into something else, entirely something that wasn't just unscripted television, but an unraveling. The carefully staged illusion of a cozy talk show had been stripped away, revealing two public figures bearing teeth, egos, and decades of built-up resentment. Joy, behorningly smug, quick-witted, and in full control, looked like someone caught off guard in her own kingdom. Harrison Ford, the guest, the outsider, had turned the interview upside down. He was no longer the one on trial. Now, it was Joy, and he wasn't finished. "You want to talk about relevance?" "Joy," Ford said, stepping slightly closer to the table. "Let's talk about who's actually still making things, who's still out there every year on screen, working with talented people, trying to put something good into the world, and who's sitting in this chair, dragging names through the mud for applause." The camera panned to the other hosts, Whoopi, Sarah, Sunny. They were paralyzed, like theatergoers, watching a scene that had gone off-script but was too captivating to interrupt. Joy tried to laugh it off. She always did. "Well, we finally found the real Harrison Ford," she said, voice teetering on the edge of control. Not the charming rogue, not the grumpy hero, just another man afraid of a little criticism. Ford's face didn't flinch. Double quotes, "No, you didn't find the real me. Joy, what you found was someone who's done taking insults disguised as insight. I've played characters people still talk about decades later. You try to reduce that to a typecast, but the truth is you wish you'd had that kind of impact even once in your career." Joy's face twitched. The jab had landed. The audience stirred again, sensing this wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. Joy tried to regroup, latching onto her usual weapons mockery. Projection, bitterness, impact. "Oh, please, the only impact you've had lately is when people fall asleep during your performances." Ford's eyes darkened. "Oh, that's cute," he said flatly. "You're trying to be cruel now. That's your defense, because deep down you know the truth. You're not a host, you're a heckler with a salary." It was brutal and accurate. Joy opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then, like a glitch in a system, she spat. "You don't know anything about what I do. You think you can psychoanalyze me because you've read a few scripts." Ford took a breath, measured and slow. Double quotes, "No, I don't need a script for this. You wrote this scene yourself." Joy's voice cracked. "You're an arrogant has-been." The audience gasped again. Someone actually said out loud, "Jesus, Ford," laughed dry and devoid of humor. "If I'm a has-been, what does that make you?" "And never was." The silence that followed was the kind you could hear vibrating through the floorboards. Joy's hands trembled slightly, but she masked it by fiddling with her cue cards. She tried to change direction, regain control. "At least I didn't sleepwalk." "Through my last 10 films," she hissed. Ford didn't respond immediately. He turned, locking eyes with the audience, those in the studio, and the millions watching at home. "Let me say something to the people watching," he said, ignoring the panel completely now. "If you've ever built something with your hands, if you've worked through pain or sacrifice to create something you're proud of, then you know how it feels to have someone like this try to reduce it to a punchline." Joy's mouth twitched. "You think people tune in to watch you moralize. They come for real conversations, not this diva meltdown." Ford turned back to her. "Then maybe you should try having one." Another beat of silence. This wasn't a moment anymore. It was a reckoning. Finally found her voice. "All right, folks, let's bring it down a notch. We've all got passionate feelings here," but Ford cut her off, gently. "No whoopee, let it happen. Let people see what this show really is." Joy was now visibly angry, her voice rising. "You want to come on my show and disrespect me? You want to turn this into a personal attack?" "I'm not turning anything," Ford said calmly. I responded. "You started this, and now you don't like how it feels when someone pushes back." The studio lights seemed to glow hotter. "Me ask you something, Joy," Ford said. "When was the last time you used this platform to lift someone up? Not tear them down, not mock them. Just acknowledge someone's work without poisoning it with sarcasm." She blinked. The question wasn't rhetorical, it demanded an answer. Joy's voice faltered. "That's not my job. I'm here to ask the tough questions." "No, you're here to get reactions," he replied. "And you got one. Hope you enjoy the ratings." Ford sat back down, but not in submission. In declaration, his posture told the story of a man reclaiming his dignity on live television. Joy folded her arms tightly. "Well, I guess we've seen what happens when you poke the bear." Ford smiled faintly. "You didn't poke the bear, Joy. You poked a man who's spent his life trying to build things. And now you've reminded everyone what it looks like when someone tries to tear it all down with a smirk and a microphone." The segment was supposed to be 15 minutes. They were now at 20-3 dot. And still no one dared to go to commercial. The silence didn't feel like commit, felt like the eye of a hurricane. Camera is still rolling, microphones still hot. No scripts, no save dot. And in that pause, that aching space between exchanges, the entire room seemed to realize the same thing. This wasn't going away. There would be no reset, no clever joke to sweep this mess under the rug. The facade had cracked wide open. Joy Behar sat there, arms folded like armor across her chest, chin raised in defiance, but her eyes, they darted, calculating, unsettled. She was flustered, but too proud to show it. Harrison Ford, seated now, looked forward, hands calmly folded in his lap. But beneath that restraint was a storm barely held in check. The producers in the control booth had stopped trying to cue commercials. The crew backstage stood frozen. Even the studio audience, those who had come expecting light morning banter, now sat motionless, caught in the emotional gravity of what they were witnessing. It was live television. But it wasn't entertainment anymore. It was raw. It was uncomfortable. And it was very, very real. Joy exhaled sharply. "You show up, blow up, and then sit there like you've made some kind of noble stand." Ford didn't blink. "No, I'm sitting here because I refuse to let someone like you define me." That line hit like a wave. Joy snapped back. "Someone like me? What's that supposed to mean?" Ford turned, locked eyes with her. "Someone who uses a platform not to illuminate, but to incinerate. Someone who wraps cruelty in commentary and calls it courage. Someone who thinks ratings are more important than respect." Joy's voice shook. "You don't get to paint me like some villain. You don't know me." "You're right," Ford said. "I don't know everything, but I know what I've seen. I know how many actors, musicians, writers have walked off this set more wounded than welcomed." One of the hosts, Sarah, finally spoke. Her voice was small, barely audible maybe. "Maybe we should take a quick break." But neither Ford nor Joy acknowledged her. Joy sat up straighter. "You think you're the only one with scars, Harrison. You think you get to walk in here and pretend your path was so much harder, so much more honorable than mine." Ford's jaw tensed. "I never said that. But I know the difference between fighting for something and fighting against someone. You've made a living being the latter." Joy scoffed, but her bravado was cracking. "Easy for you to say from your mansion in Jackson Hole. You think struggle only counts when you've got a script and a camera pointed at you." Ford looked genuinely wounded for a moment. "Do you really think that's all this has been? A performance? That everything I've worked for is just make-believe?" Joy didn't answer. Instead, she said almost reflexively, "You know what? I don't need this. I don't need you." Ford tilted his head. "Then why are you still talking to me?" The audience laughed, nervous, uncertain. Not because the moment was funny, but because laughter was the only outlet for the rising pressure. Joy's lips parted. But before she could speak, Ford continued, You say I've been coasting on old roles, that I haven't taken risks. Every time I step onto a set, I'm risking being compared to something I did decades ago. Every time I open my mouth in public, I risk backlash. I earned that legacy. Joy. It wasn't handed to me." He paused, then added, "Unlike some of U.S." The implication stung. Joy's eyes narrowed. "You mean this show, this panel? You think this was easy?" "No," Ford replied. "I think it was convenient." Now the words were knives, quiet ones, measured, but they cut deeper than yelling ever could. Joy stood. Her voice trembled with rage. "You think I got here by being soft, by playing nice? I clawed my way into this seat. You don't get to diminish that because you don't like my tone." Ford rose to meet her, matching her energy, but not her anger. "I don't care about your tone. I care about how you use it." Joy stared at him, breathing heavily. He lowered his voice again. "I came here to talk about a story. I poured everything into a film that meant something to me. And instead, you turned it into a courtroom where you get to be judge, jury, and executioner. Well, I'm done playing defendant." She stepped closer, face inches from his. "You walked in here thinking you were untouchable." Ford shook his head. "No, I walked in hoping for a conversation. You turned it into a confrontation." For a second, everything held still, even time. Then Joy said, "Quieter now. This show, this chair, it's all I've got." And there it was. The mask slipping, the vulnerability beneath a snark, the woman behind the persona, suddenly visible. Ford looked at her with something close to compassion. "And that's the tragedy," he whispered, "because you could have had more you'd chosen to build instead of break." The audience let out a low murmur, some nodding, some frozen. Joy said nothing. She just sat back down, and this time it wasn't defiance. It was exhaustion. The quiet was unbearable now, not the kind of quiet you get when a guest finishes their segment and the crowd applauds politely. No, this was heavier. It wasn't silence. It was aftermath. Joy Behar sat in her chair, looking smaller than she had. At any point during the confrontation, no snarky comebacks, no smirks, just stillness. Her fingers traced invisible patterns on the cue cards in her lap. Her eyes didn't meet anyone else's, not even the camera's. Harrison Ford stood a few feet away, his posture erect but his eyes softening. The storm within him had passed. What remained was the quiet devastation of having said what needed to be said, of having lit a match that couldn't be unstruck. The other hosts, Whoopi, Sarah, Sunny, sat in stunned silence. No one dared break the tension. No one even moved. They all knew instinctively that this wasn't their moment to interrupt. It was Joy's reckoning. And Harrison's closure. Ford took a breath. "I didn't come here to make enemies," he said, his voice calm again. "I came here to talk about a film that's about second chances, redemption, people trying to make peace with the past." He turned his gaze toward Joy. "But instead, we both showed what happens when we cling too tightly to old wounds." Joy said nothing. Her face was unreadable. For once, no sarcasm, no snapback, just listening. Ford nodded, as if giving her permission to stay silent. "I'll go," he said, and then, without waiting for a cue, he started walking toward the edge of the stage. The studio cameras followed him, not with the brisk tracking of a tight segment, but with the slow reverence of a documentary. This wasn't television anymore. This was something else, something intimate, human. When Ford reached the curtain, he paused. Not for effect, but because something inside him told him not to leave it like this. He turned around. The audience, still unsure whether to clap or cry, waited breathlessly. Ford looked directly at Joy. "For what it's worth, I hope you find whatever it is you're really looking for." Joy blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed, and that was it. Ford disappeared. Behind the curtain, a beat passed. Then another. The studio sat in silence, unsure if they had just witnessed a meltdown, a therapy session, or a televised exorcism. Whoopi finally cleared her throat. We'll be right back." And then Finalia cut to commercial. But the conversation didn't end there. By the time the episode aired in full later that afternoon, clips had already gone viral. Hashtags were trending. The confrontation was dissected frame by frame, line by line, memes circulated. Think pieces followed. Some called it a career-ending moment for Joy. Others hailed Harrison Ford for standing up to the toxicity of daytime television. And others still saw two people too damaged to back down from a fight they never should have started. But underneath all the noise, something deeper lingered. The question everyone kept returning to: was this a breakdown or a breakthrough? A week later, Joy returned to The View. She didn't address the confrontation directly, but her tone was different, calmer, less defensive. It was subtle, but it was there. Something had shifted. Harrison Ford, meanwhile, continued his press tour, but on his terms. No more morning fluff shows. No more segments where charm was currency. When asked about the View interview, he offered no apologies. "I said what I meant, and I meant what I said," he told GQ. "I don't think honesty should feel like violence, but sometimes it does, and the public, they didn't forget." The clip remains one of the most watched moments in daytime history, not because it was salacious, not because it was messy, but because it was real. To people, to lives, to legacies, clashing in full view of the world. No scripts, no edits, just truth, and maybe that truth, however uncomfortable, is the most powerful thing of all. The gloves came off, the masks dropped, and what we saw wasn't perfect, but it was unforgettable. What did you think of this confrontation? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more raw, unfiltered drama from the world of entertainment stories that show you what really happens when the lights are hot and the truth refuses to stay silent.